In the autumn of 1958, the People's Republic of China stood at a crossroads. Less than a decade after the revolution, the nation's leaders believed they had found a path to rapid modernization. What followed would become one of history's most devastating economic failures, though its architects believed they were building a better future. The plan was called the Great Leap Forward. It promised to transform China from an agricultural society into an industrial powerhouse within 15 years. On paper, the goals seemed ambitious but achievable. Backyard furnaces would produce steel. Collective farms would increase grain production. Millions of workers would be mobilized toward common goals. The campaign began with genuine enthusiasm. In villages across China, families constructed small furnaces in their yards. They melted down tools, pots, and anything metal to meet steel production quotas. Local officials reported remarkable increases in output. The numbers looked impressive in Beijing, but the steel produced in these backyard furnaces was largely unusable. The quality was too poor for construction or manufacturing. Meanwhile, the farmers who should have been tending crops were instead feeding furnaces. Agricultural knowledge accumulated over generations was dismissed in favor of unproven techniques promoted by political campaigns. Records indicate that officials at every level faced intense pressure to report success. When harvests fell short, many chose to report inflated numbers rather than admit failure. These false reports traveled up the chain of command, creating an increasingly distorted picture of reality. The government collected grain based on these exaggerated figures. Historians suggest that in some regions, authorities took nearly all available food, believing the inflated reports meant substantial surplus remained. Villages that had barely enough to survive saw their stores emptied to meet quotas based on fictional harvests. By 1959, the gap between reported success and actual conditions had grown catastrophic. Yet the structural incentives remained unchanged. Officials who reported problems risked being labeled as counter-revolutionaries. The system had created powerful reasons to maintain the illusion of success. Communication between different levels of government had broken down in crucial ways. Provincial leaders competed to show the most dramatic improvements. They implemented increasingly extreme policies to demonstrate revolutionary fervor. Evidence points to decisions made without adequate understanding of agricultural realities or industrial processes. The weather complicated an already dire situation. Droughts and floods affected various regions between 1959 and 1961. Under normal circumstances, China's agricultural system could have absorbed these shocks. But the disruption of farming practices, the diversion of rural labor, and the extraction of grain based on false figures had eliminated all buffers. Famine arrived gradually, then overwhelmed entire provinces. In areas where communities had maintained traditional farming methods for centuries, sudden policy changes had disrupted planting cycles and irrigation systems. The knowledge of when to plant, how to manage water, and which crops suited which soils had been set aside. Contemporary records from this period are incomplete and often unreliable. The government did not acknowledge the famine publicly. Foreign observers had limited access to affected areas. Only decades later would researchers begin to piece together the full scope of the catastrophe. Estimates of the death toll vary considerably among historians. Conservative figures suggest at least 15 million deaths. Other researchers analyzing demographic data and local records propose numbers exceeding 30 million. The actual figure may never be known with certainty. The economic costs extended far beyond the immediate famine. Industrial production had been severely disrupted. Agricultural systems required years to recover. An entire generation's education had been interrupted. The loss of human capital and institutional knowledge created effects that persisted for decades. Evidence suggests that some leaders began recognizing the crisis by 1960. Adjustments were made quietly. The backyard furnace campaign was scaled back. Some agricultural policies were modified, but these changes came incrementally, and public acknowledgement of the failure remained politically impossible. The Great Leap Forward officially ended in 1962. The government shifted toward more conventional economic planning. Private farming plots were quietly permitted again. Industrial targets became more realistic, but no comprehensive accounting of what had gone wrong was undertaken at the time. For years afterward, discussion of the famine remained restricted within China. The events were characterized as natural disasters compounded by Soviet policy changes. Only gradually did a more complete picture emerge, as records became available and survivors shared their experiences. Economic historians note that the catastrophe stemmed not from a single decision, but from a system that prevented correction. The initial policies might have been adjusted or abandoned if accurate information had reached decision-makers. Instead, the structure of reporting and political incentives meant that problems were concealed until they became irreversible. The episode illustrates how institutional failures can compound individual mistakes. The pressure to demonstrate success, the punishment of those who reported difficulties, and the isolation of leadership from ground-level reality created a machinery that amplified errors rather than correcting them. What began as an ambitious development program became a cautionary example of centralized planning without feedback mechanisms. The cost was measured not just in economic terms, but in human lives, lost potential, and damaged trust in institutions. The consequences of those years between 1958 and 1962 would shape Chinese society for generations, a reminder that even well-intentioned plans require the capacity to recognize and respond to failure.